For the Southern California Prep Insider, I'm Keith DeMolder here for another edition of the LA City Section Lacrosse Podcast, presented to you by the United States Marine Corps. We are here at Barthel Field here at Wilson High School. Beautiful site, folks. You got to make sure to come out here for today's edition of the podcast, because the Wilson Mules right now, they are one of the hottest teams in the city section. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the boys' top 10. The girls will come up in a little bit. But for the boys, firstly, we'd just like to apologize. For the first podcast, we had El Segundo in the top 10. They are in the southern section, not in the city section. So this is an all-city section podcast, and that's what we have for you today. Let's talk about the top 10, though. Palisades, they're number one right now. They have some quality wins. Obviously, of course, a win over Birmingham this season. They'll play coming up, so that's a huge game to watch out for. But through and through, their city section record has proven it. Palisades, the number one team. Then you talk about Wilson. They're the number two team, one of the best records in the city section. They haven't been tested as much as Palisades and Birmingham, but right now they're 8-1. They're looking at a very hot start. They had a win over Long Beach Poly recently. So right now, Wilson at number two. Then throughout the rest of the list, we got Birmingham, number 3, El Camino Real, number 4, Hamilton, then North Valley Military Institute, Valley Academy of Arts and Sciences at 7, Hollywood at 8, Westchester at 9, and Jordan at the 10 seed. Looking at some of the scores of this past week on Saturday, Hamilton with a very close win over ECR, 13-12, really could have gone either way. And then Wilson, as we mentioned, with a win over Long Beach Poly, 9-8. Long Beach Poly, a Southern Section team. But before that, Wilson had a tough loss to Canby, 9-7. They're looking for some bounce-back wins coming up soon. Birmingham won 15-12 over ECR. I was at that game. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then Palisades with a huge win, 15-5 over El Segundo. Not a lot of action this week in the city section. There's a lot of breaks because there's some kids who are off of school, that sort of thing. So not as much action. Next week, though, we'll have a full slate of games on Tuesday. We'll get to those picks in just a second. But talking about Wilson right now, they're the number 2 team in the section for a reason. They're 8-1, the best record overall, but mainly because of how dominant they have been over city section teams. Right now, they are 4-0 against city section teams, and they have scored, wow, look at this number, folks. They outscored Westchester and Jordan 73-1. In 4 games, they scored 73 goals and allowed just 1 to Westchester and Jordan, so not too bad of a showing, to say the least. That said, Westchester and Jordan, they've had their faults this year. Pretty new programs for both of those schools, so you can't fault them. But right now, Wilson looking very dominant as well. A win over Long Beach Poly, not an easy thing to do, so we'll see what they do towards their latter half of their schedule, especially when they play some of these more difficult teams. Birmingham and Palisades both look like the top teams in the section as well. Pally had a win over Birmingham 17-3 earlier. They also beat Hamilton 23-7 at the start of the year. So right now, Palisades, they're the top dogs for a reason, because, as I mentioned, of their city section schedule. But we'll see in a couple of weeks how they fare against Birmingham once again. That'll be a top game to watch for sure. So players of the week for the boys, going to have to give a shout out to Garrett Kim. Against Birmingham, he was essentially all that ECR had, especially late. One of the best scorers in the section by far. He stands only 5'5", folks, but he can rip it like no other. Right now, he leads the city section in goals scored with 37. He had 7 against the Pats, and then he also scored 5 in a recent loss to Hamilton, 13-12. So he's really been a spark plug for El Camino Real. He's an attacker. He's also a mid, so he can do it all. Garrett Kim, you get a game ball from me. Now let's get on to some picks. It's really a toss-up, folks. Hamilton versus ECR, another rematch. Going to have to go with Hamilton. I think right now ECR, their defense has been lackluster. Taking a look at some of those highlights from that ECR Birmingham game, it was all Birmingham, especially going into the second half. We saw them start off hot in that second half. There were some injuries on both sides. But that said, ECR, their defense, not what it should be. Garrett Kim basically stormed everything back and kept it close, but eventually not close enough for ECR. So I say Hamilton in that one. Then Westchester versus Jordan on that Tuesday matchup. Tuesday, folks, it's going to be a big day. We'll have the podcast out there at one of the games. We'll have an interview as well, so stay tuned for that. But I'm going to have to go with Jordan against Westchester. Westchester has not won a game all season. As you know, Jordan, they've been tested as well. But I think Jordan, right now, they have a more impressive resume against some of these teams. So give me the Bulldogs right now. And then a big matchup, big matchup. Birmingham versus Palisades. I say stick with what you know. Palisades, I have them taking that one over Birmingham. So those are our picks. We'll see how they do come Tuesday. We'll have those scoring updates for you on Twitter. And let's take a look at some of the highlights as ECR played Birmingham at ECR. Ultimately, though, the Pats and their strikers, too much for ECR to handle. And we see Garrett Kim right here, explosive as ever, shooting it from, I want to say, about maybe 20 to 25 yards away. He has one of the best shots in the section, as we've mentioned. Garrett Kim, watch out for him, but this ECR defense, they have to get better if they're going to try and go for a city section title. So that was the boys' side highlights. Now let's take a look at some of the girls' highlights. I was at that game. Birmingham going on the road. They played a couple of these Simi Valley teams, and Royal, yet another one of them. Looking at these highlights, it was Royal through and through. Birmingham came back late due to their big scorer, Zella Bodian. We'll get to her in a little bit, but Birmingham, their challenge in this non-conference schedule, they had a couple of wins early, but thus far they've seen some ups and downs. Nevertheless, though, they're ultimately one of the better teams in the LA City section. Not the top one, though. That title goes to Palisades. Let's get right into the top 10. Number 1, we got Palisades at 1, Birmingham at 2, Hamilton at 3. Number 4 is Valley Academy of Arts and Sciences. Number 5, El Camino Real. Number 6, Hollywood. Number 7, Westchester. And at the 8th seed, it's going to be North Valley Military Institute. So looking at this girls section, Birmingham clearly looking like one of the better teams. They had a recent win, 14-3 over ECR. Then El Segundo had a 12-8 win over Hamilton. Hamilton has been challenged. They have a lot of scoring ability, but the defense really has not been there as much as they would have liked. As I mentioned, Birmingham dropped one to Royal, 14-12. And Palisades, they haven't played as of late, so the number 1 ranking a little bit tentative right now. But they have wins over ECR and 2 wins over Hamilton, so that's what's giving them their top spot right now in the section rankings. The Valley Academy of Arts and Sciences, VAAS, right now they have a loaded roster, and they rely on this kind of scoring by committee. They don't have a big gal that can score all the points, but instead a balanced attack with Belissa Corlew, Giselle Burgos, Diana Sanchez, the whole squad. They can really put it in the back of the net, so they like to share the ball around, and that really has been a key for VAAS this season. A big game coming up for El Camino Real this Thursday against Simi Valley. I will be there, and then they don't have many big games for a couple of weeks. A couple schools, as I mentioned, still on spring break right now. Some schedules still being finalized, but for El Camino Real, a big game for them going on the road. Simi Valley, they lost to Birmingham earlier this year. If El Camino Real can get a win at Simi Valley, maybe that gives El Camino Real a chance for the top spot. Who knows? The schedule will be coming up a little bit shortly. Player of the week for the girls' side of the city section. We mentioned her in the previous podcast. It's her once again, Zella Badowian, in a 14-3 win over El Camino Real. She scored 5 points via 3 goals, 2 assists, and then against Royal, in a loss, admittedly, she was one of the best players for Birmingham by far. 8 goals and an assist. Right now, she leads the section with 38 goals scored. She is simply unstoppable. This Birmingham defense, much like the boys' side, needs a little bit of help, but they can certainly score goals over there in Lake Balboa. So with that, we're going to head it to the end of the podcast. Once again, folks, thank you for watching the LA City Section Lacrosse podcast. For all of us here at the Southern California Prep Insider, I'm Keith DeMolder saying thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Take it easy.